Welcome to the Cryptid Compendium. I'm your host, Remy Militello, and this series will be about the history of various cryptids. Join me when I go into the past to see how it connects to our present. Then we will look at the modern version of the creature and the best evidence put forward to prove their existence. For the first entry in our series, we turn to one of the most beloved and famous cryptids of all time, Bigfoot. Probably the most famous of all of the North American cryptids, Bigfoot if you're an American, Sasquatch if you were a Canadian, Yeti if you're Russian, Almas if you're Mongolian, Yowie if you're Australian, or Yiren if you're Chinese. Whatever you call them, they are big, lovable, menacing, ape-like creatures. Or said another way, they're like big, furry mountain folk. Today, we are going to be going through a tour of the history of Bigfoot, or the species more generally known as Bigfoots, in a naming nightmare. Before we go any further into the woods, while I used the various names of the big furry mountain folks as synonyms before, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that each flavor of Bigfoot comes with its own distinct personality and regional variances. For instance, the North American Bigfoot, which we are primarily speaking about, is more on the shy and aloof side of things, often caught watching, but only turning violent if intruded upon. The Yeti and the Yiren are alleged to be far more. The Yiren, or hairy men of China, were said to have come down from their caves to raid and plunder villages. The Yeti, or the Mehte in Himalayan folklore, in Nepal and elsewhere, the Yeti is known as the Abominable Snowman. This lovable ball of floof and rage is described as an ape-like creature that is, of course, taller than the average human and is believed to reside in the Himalayas, Siberia, Central, and East Asia. The Yeti, during pre-19th century, enjoyed being thought of as a glacier being and was alleged to have been worshipped by the indigenous communities that fell prey to its whims. The Australian Yowie is the outback's brutal and ancient iteration of the ape man. Yowie is just one of several names that are sprawled across the Aboriginal oral history of the creature. The Yowie is even thought to have made appearances as a type of Quincan or rock art of the native people. The Yowie has many different accounts, conflicting from the creature being a shy, timid beast of the bush or an aggressive man-eater. Honestly, it's a fascinating creature and could probably comprise an episode to itself, but it goes to show that once again across the globe, from the Yiren and the Yeti, the roots of our furry friends go deep into cultures across the world. People often date the origins of the North American Bigfoot to the late 1960s. That is when the search for Bigfoot became more mainstream and somewhat of a cottage industry in and of itself. The most likely explanation for this explosion in popularity is what is considered by many to be the first proof of Bigfoot's existence, the Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967. A film that is under a minute long, but that film has been used to prove the existence of Bigfoot ever since it was put to celluloid back in 1967. Allegedly, Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson were shooting a Western movie. They were doing a scene along the banks of the Bluff Creek in Northern California. That's the official Bigfoot canon anyway. I find it strange that no footage exists from the Western that they were making, which I do think gives some credence to maybe this whole thing being a hoax, but to be fair, it's never been properly debunked either. and remains an intriguing piece of history to this day. A lot of Squatchers and Bigfoot enthusiasts may be interested to know that the legends and stories of big furry mountain folk date back to times and places that we don't have much written history on, but they span at least a few hundred years, if not over 1,000 years. According to anthropologist David Degling, the stories around big furry mountain folk existed independently amongst each other in various Native American communities. They lacked a common name for this creature. It wasn't called Bigfoot, but the descriptions of the things that they saw all point them to being very much akin to the commonly sought after Bigfoots of today. It's thought that Bigfoot you or I would recognize today shares an array of features with what has been spotted all along the past. Native American tribes from coast to coast all had a legend of the hairy mountain folk. Across the pond, there were so-called wild men. When Europeans began to stalk the shores of the Americas, they saw this figure there as well. The wild man was believed to exist by loggers, miners, trappers, and pretty much anyone who drew their living from the wild. All manners of wilderness professionals alleged to see the wild men and told tall tales of these creatures. It doesn't take a great amount of imagination to make the jump from hairy wild men to ape-like. Whether this is the same species or regional variant offshoot that we would know as a North American Bigfoot is up to speculation. But Bigfoot, or something that looks a whole lot like him, have been roaming the forests of America for hundreds of years at the very least, which is just crazy to think about. Or maybe it didn't. Because mainstream and most non-fringe groups have debunked the existence of Bigfoot and his kin for almost as long as the modern Bigfoot pop culture boom has existed in the late 60s and early 70s. You don't exactly need to look very far for countless sightings and first-hand accounts. Amazon Prime has a buffet of documentaries that are people simply talking about that time they saw Bigfoot. Several TV shows and films have tried to find the creature legitimately, but have always come up short, finding little more than blurry sticks and disappointment. Does failure to provide conclusive proof after all these years mean that our sometimes smelly and always furry mountain friends don't exist? It could, but it doesn't conclusively rule out the existence of Bigfoots either. Or at least an animal that comes pretty close to our popular ideas about the creature. Frankly, weirder things have happened. All sorts of animals were thought to have been extinct, but turned out to be just playing possum. To the surprisingly cute New Guinea big-eared bat, to the disgusting and not at all a lobster tree lobster, and to the downright terrifying goblin shark. Just look at that mouth! But to the almost unbelievable discovery of the coelacanth that was thought to have become extinct 66 million years ago, but was found by fishermen in 1938 off the coast of South Africa. All of these creatures were thought to have gone extinct, but turns out they hadn't. The obvious advantage all of these animals possess over Bigfoot, though, is that they definitively existed in the fossil record at one point at the very least. But that aside, I think it is plausible that we just haven't found one yet, and that an army of squatchers determined to do just that, I hope they do. I hope they do find something, because the truth is, I just wish Bigfoot were real, and that he were also my best friend. I'm clearly not the only one, because in 1995, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO for short, was formed to prove scientifically that Bigfoots and Sasquatches exist. They also do Bigfoot expeditions across the country, which appear to be a kind of nature walk / look for Bigfoot hybrid adventure kind of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, it looks kind of fun. I would go. These places look pretty. But something that's cool is the BFRO website, the link in the description below, has a comprehensive sightings database, which is a lot of fun to mess around with. I can see that my home state of New York has a respectable 117 sightings. Florida has an eye-watering 303 as of recording this, but not a single state compares to the absolutely gargantuan sightings of the champion of the world, Washington State, with an astonishing 697 sightings. But interestingly, all of the lower 48 of America have seen sightings, even Rhode Island with its baby 5. Canada has had an enormous number of sightings as well. And there are even a smattering of reports of similar creatures from as far flung as Russia, China, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And it's not even uncommon to see claims of physical evidence of Bigfoot. But it is harder for them to stand up to scrutiny. In 1976, of course it's the 70s, the FBI actually tested hair produced by Bigfoot researcher Peter Byron, and they determined that the hair was actually from the deer family. But some stories and videos are pretty compelling, even if it's just to those who experienced the sight firsthand. Stories that have been shared for, at a minimum, a few centuries. It's astonishing how long the legacy of our hairy mountain folk really has been, stretching from times without recorded history to our modern surveillance state. Sadly, though, the truth of the legend is still shrouded in beautiful matted fur. Until the day definitive proof is found, people will likely talk of our sometimes angry and sometimes shy, but always furry mountain folk for centuries still to come. As a final note, I want to say that while we lack anything even resembling definitive proof of Bigfoot's existence, I hope some incarnation of these furry weirdos turn out to be real. The Yeti, Bigfoot, Yowie would just delight me endlessly if one was real. Things are only legends until discoveries convert them into reality. The Kraken was a cryptid. Now the giant squid is a cool-ass real sea monster. The Australian platypus was famously thought to be a taxidermied fraud because it was thought to be too ridiculous to exist. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm betting on the Yowie. If any of them are real, it's gotta be the Yowie because the weirdest things live in Australia. Always bet on Australia. And with that, I am going to wrap up this first episode of the Cryptid Compendium. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe and hit the bell for when I put up another episode of the Cryptid Compendium. I'm also going to be doing exhibit videos where we go over some of the most compelling videos that have been put forward to prove the existence of the creature at issue. In this case, Bigfoot. Please join me again, like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thank you so much, and stay spooky, and until I see you again, Have a horrifying week.